Hello, everybody, and good morning. Welcome to the very first lecture of the UCLA Tarjan Center Community Lecture Series, hosted in partnership with the California Department of Developmental Services. This new series pairs expert presenters with community discussants who bring lived experience to each topic. I'm Dr. Jasper Estebio, Director of Training for the Tarjan Center, and it is my pleasure to be here with you for the July 2026 Community Lecture. As we welcome you to our lecture series, we would like to thank and acknowledge our partner, the California Department of Developmental Services, and our co-sponsors, the UCLA Program, the UCLA Center for Autism Research and Treatment, and the UCLA Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities Research Center. As we get started, a few announcements and reminders. Firstly, our community lecture series will now extend in time from 12 p.m. to 1:30 p.m. to account for the presentation, community discussant, and Q&A. For anyone unable to stay for the full time, today's lecture, as well as all of our other lectures, is recorded and will be available on our website. All right, for closed captions, toward the bottom of your Zoom screen, you can find the CC button on the toolbar, and where it says Show Captions, click on the up arrow and select Closed Captions in English or in your preferred language. We are also now offering live Spanish and ASL interpretation. For Spanish interpretation, click Interpretation on your Zoom toolbar and choose Spanish. For ASL interpretation, the ASL interpreter will be spotlighted on the screen. For other languages, Zoom provides interpretation in 35 different languages. Please enter your questions for our community discussant and our speaker into the Q&A throughout the talk, and we will facilitate discussion at the end of the presentations. Please also complete our evaluation survey to provide feedback and suggestions for future lectures. The link to the evaluation survey will be sent in the chat today, as well as in a follow-up email later this week. Now I would like to introduce our speaker. All right, good morning. Hi, Dr. Laugeson. Dr. Elizabeth Laugeson is a clinical professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Biobehavioral Sciences at the UCLA Semel Institute for Neuroscience and Human Behavior and is a licensed clinical psychologist. She serves as the director of the UCLA Tarjan Center, which is a university center for excellence in developmental disabilities, and is the founding director of the UCLA Peers Clinic. As the creator of the Peers Social Skills programs, Dr. Laugeson has pioneered evidence-based treatments for individuals from preschool to adulthood, focusing on friendship, dating, and employment. She has authored 5 English language books on social skills and trained tens of thousands of professionals, educators, and families worldwide. Impressively, her Peers programs have been translated into over a dozen different languages and are implemented in more than 150 countries and are considered one of the few empirically supported social skills curricula for neurodivergent youth across the globe. Today, she will present Building Pathways to Employment, the DDS-UCLA Partnership for Autistic Adults. Please join me in giving a very warm virtual welcome to Dr. Elizabeth Laugeson.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Estebio, for that kind introduction. And I am deeply honored to be speaking at the inaugural lecture for the Tarjan Center DDS Community Lecture Series. So thank you so much for the invitation. As Dr. Estebio mentioned, I'm going to be talking a little bit about building pathways to employment and highlighting some of the work that we're doing with this DDS-UCLA partnership for autistic adults. I am definitely expected to disclose some possible conflicts of interest at the beginning of any lecture. So my disclosure statement is that I do receive book royalties for the sales of my books through Taylor and Francis and Wiley and Sons. And I also receive research funding from the National Institutes of Health, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, the California Department of Rehabilitation, NIMBLE, Autism Speaks, and the California Department of Developmental Services. Very grateful for that funding. We have a number of learning objectives for today's lecture, and so the first is that hopefully by the end of this lecture you will all be able to describe the key components of the DDS-UCLA partnership model for supporting autistic adults in advocacy and employment. You should be able to identify strategies to develop career readiness and employment pathways for autistic individuals. And you should also be able to understand how advocacy training and social skills development contribute to successful workplace outcomes for autistic adults. So in this next hour that I'll be going over this project, I'm going to give you a little overview of this partnership between DDS and UCLA. I'll talk a little bit about the importance of advocacy skills for emerging disability rights leaders. This whole program is really focused on targeting individuals with lived experiences. So in this case, autistic individuals who have an interest in careers as disability rights leaders. Very exciting project. And so I'll talk about why this would be kind of an important area to provide some training in. I'll give you an overview of the UCLA Advocacy Academy, which is something that we've been running for a couple of years now here at UCLA. I have a little bit of research on this program that I'll share with you. From there, I'll talk a little bit about the employment landscape and outcomes for autistic adults, and give you an overview of the Peers for Careers program, which is our employment social skills program that teaches skills related to finding and maintaining employment for autistic job seekers. I'll also give you some resources that you can use moving forward, and then we will turn things over to our community discussant, Monika Jezebelle. And one of the exciting things that we're doing now in this community lecture series is that each lecture will culminate with a community discussant. This will be a person with a lived experience, and in this case with Monika Jezebelle, she actually is an alum from our Advocacy Academy. So she'll get to share a little bit about her experiences in that program. And then we'll wrap up this afternoon with a Q&A with both me and Monika. So looking forward to that. All right, so I want to tell you a little bit about this partnership between the California Department of Developmental Services and the UCLA Tarjan Center. This is a workforce preparation and placement program, and the purpose is to improve employment outcomes for autistic adults that are served by California Regional Center System. And so if you are not from California or you don't know about the California Regional Center System, this is a statewide network that coordinates and funds lifelong services and supports for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities and disabilities of different kinds. Regional centers are funded by the California Department of Developmental Services, so DDS, and clients of the regional center are served by the UCLA Tarjan Center, which is the University Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities. That kind of explains the different partners here. But the goal of this workforce preparation and placement program is to ultimately employ people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in the DDS system, okay? And so the driving force behind this idea really comes from the new director of the California DDS, that's Pete Chervenka. About a year and a half ago, I was up in Sacramento meeting with Pete and his team and talking a little bit about the work of the Tarjan Center, doing some introductions. And we discovered that we had this shared interest in employment for people with disabilities. And I had shared a little information about our Advocacy Academy. It was then called the Leadership Academy at UCLA. I shared information about Peers for Careers, which is our employment program. And Pete had the idea, well, why don't we combine those two programs and provide some internships for these individuals at DDS? And it was one of the things he wanted to do there is to really bring more people with lived experiences into the Department of Developmental Services. And so I have to give Pete the credit here for this brainchild, but we're very excited that we've moved forward with this partnership. Our partnership includes many other aspects. This is one of the programs that we're supporting through this partnership, and I'm excited to share more about that partnership with you today. There's basically 5 program components to the workforce preparation and placement program. And so this infographic kind of describes them a bit. But the first is that we are going to be providing some neuro-inclusive employer training. And this is for training for people at DDS. So this would be supervisors, managers, employees, anyone that would be interacting with our interns that are part of this program. Another arm of this program is this Advocacy Academy that you heard me refer to. And this is where we're basically developing advocacy skills for autistic emerging disability rights leaders. So these are autistic job seekers that have some interest in policy making and becoming disability rights leaders in the field. And so we're going to give them some training on how to do that. Peers for Careers is a third arm of this program, and this is our employment social skills program for autistic job seekers. And we have over a decade of research on this program that shows it's pretty powerful, pretty effective in improving employment outcomes for autistic job seekers. Now, we also have some additional arms here that include things like individualized coaching for our autistic participants. And so this would include having 2 coaches that go through the program in tandem with our participants. One is a career coach, kind of / advocacy coach, kind of depending on where we're at in the program. These coaches typically are undergraduate or graduate students who have some interest in the field of developmental disabilities and have volunteered to be a part of this project. They are paid and compensated for their time, but they come in with a real passion for developmental disabilities and autism. And so we train them to provide this advocacy coaching and career coaching. In addition, because this is all about helping to really support emerging disability rights leaders, the second coach that each participant is paired with is someone who's already an established disability rights leader. It's a person with a lived experience. They have some sort of developmental disability, and they have an interest in mentoring emerging leaders that are interested in policymaking and advocacy. So and they are also paid for their time as well, as are our participants. Everyone is being compensated for their time, which is really nice. But that individualized coaching is a really unique model of what we're proposing here with this workforce preparation and placement program. Again, we also have internships. This whole program, it's a year-long program for our participants, will culminate with paid internships either at the Department of Developmental Services in Sacramento or at UCLA. And there'll be both hybrid and in-person or remote options available to our participants. So the focus of this lecture is really going to be on our Advocacy Academy and Peers for Careers. As I mentioned, there's 5 different arms to this program. We could go on and on all day. I'm really going to keep us focused on those 2 components, the Advocacy Academy and Peers for Careers. So before we get into kind of describing these programs, I want to define some of the terms that we're going to be using. So this is kind of advocacy language. So when we refer to advocacy, this is really the process of influencing public policy to create meaningful systems change and improve the lives of people with disabilities. So an example of this would be meeting with lawmakers about some new proposed legislation, right? That's advocacy. Public policy that includes laws, regulations, and organizational rules that guide decisions and affect how systems operate. So an example of that would include legislation. Some new law that is up for a vote, that would be public policy. Systems change refers to improving the ways that organizations, services, and governments work so that they can better create outcomes or better outcomes for different people that they serve. And so an example of this would be having more accessible services. For example, we have this wonderful ASL interpreter on the screen right now that's helping to provide this information through American Sign Language. We have a Spanish interpreter in the Spanish channel right now doing the same. Those are ways of making our lecture more accessible to people. So that's some of the language that I'm going to be using throughout this talk. Now I want to talk a little bit about why we would want to even teach advocacy skills, right? If we're talking about cultivating a new generation of emerging disability rights leaders, why is advocacy so important? Well, number one, teaching advocacy skills is basically building a new generation of disability rights leaders. That is how we become disability rights leaders, is advocating for things that are important to us. It not only develops self-advocacy, which is being able to advocate for yourself, but teaching these types of skills also enhances leadership skills and also public speaking skills. It can increase the knowledge of disability policy, law, and systems change. You have to learn about what's worked in the past, maybe what hasn't, in order to think about how to change things for the future. Teaching advocacy skills also prepares advocates to shape local, state, and national policy. So what needs to change? Well, we need to know more about what's happening in order to do that. And also this, of course, this process amplifies the voices of people with lived experience, which is always an important part of any conversation about systems change. Also, teaching advocacy skills fosters community leadership, creates pathways for people to serve on advisory boards, on committees, commissions, and any type of public service. It's going to strengthen self-determination of that person, that disability rights leader, and advocacy across systems. It's going to expand representation of leaders with lived experience in the decision making. There's this saying in the disability rights community, nothing about us without us, right? People should be at the table with lived experience. And of course, these advocacy skills are going to help promote sustainable leadership through mentorship and peer support. So even our established disability rights leaders, we expect to get something out of this advocacy skills training by providing mentorship to other people and enhancing this new generation of disability rights leaders. So I mentioned that this Advocacy Academy has been in existence for a few years now. We used to call it our UCLA Leadership Academy for emerging disability rights leaders. We had a little bit of a branding change where we changed the name just because there's definitely a lot of leadership skills that are being taught. But if you really want to break it down, what are we really teaching? We're teaching advocacy skills. And so we're now calling it our Advocacy Academy. And the sessions focus on things like disability history, law, self-advocacy, and leadership, just kind of generally. The participants in the program, they attend virtual sessions. So this is all offered over Zoom for 2 hours a week for 12 weeks in total. And the first hour of every 2-hour session involves some type of invited speaker. And so all of the invited speakers, they're different every week, are people that are well established disability rights leaders. They're well known, they're really making a difference, they're moving the needle. And so they share their advocacy stories and what knowledge they want to impart. And then there's a Q&A after and a discussion, and it's very interactive, very interesting, and very inspiring. And so that's where we start each session. Then we get into sort of a didactic lesson around advocacy. We're trying to teach skills as well as inspire. From there, the participants in the Advocacy Academy will practice newly learned skills with the support of their advocacy coaches. So remember that we have an advocacy coach or career coach, and we also have, we call them senior fellows, but these are essentially people who are already well-established disability rights leaders. They have this dyad of coaches that works with each participant, and they practice the skills together. We have small group discussions, large group discussions, small practice, large practice. And also we're really encouraging utilizing these skills outside of the session. So there's also homework assignments each week where we practice the skills for like 1 or 2 hours with those advocacy coaches. All right, so some things you should know about this Advocacy Academy. It was co-developed with individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Nothing about us without us, right? There's interactive learning through expert-led sessions. So not only are our speakers individuals that are disability rights leaders, many of them self-advocates, many of them people with lived experience, but the lessons are also co-led by individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We have these practice activities. We have, like I said, small and large group discussions. And again, there's this weekly skills practice. There's a lot of individualized mentorship that comes through this program from our trained advocacy coaches and our disability rights leaders with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And because of that, we actually do a 5-week coaching academy just prior to the Advocacy Academy. So we really get our coaches prepared to be coaching our participants. All of this culminates or ends with an advocacy showcase. And so the advocacy showcase is the very last week of the Advocacy Academy, where participants present their advocacy topics to their other peers in the Academy and also other disability rights leaders. Many of our speakers will come back for this event. Members of the DDS community will be present as well, and our participants will be pitching their advocacy ideas during this advocacy showcase. So very, very fun evening. So I want to share with you a little example of some of the skills that we teach in the Advocacy Academy. And so this is our Tell Your Story model. And it's really based on the TEL model, which is stands for, it's an acronym, stands for trustworthiness. That's the T. The E is emotion, and the L is logic. And this is really based on research that shows how effective communication works when pitching ideas and telling your story. So the trustworthiness, that's the first part, is where you would be introducing yourself, really getting someone kind of acquainted with who you are. So you'd be sharing your name, where you're from. We have a little example on the screen here of Joe Bruin. If you know UCLA's mascot, it's the Bruins. So we went with Joe Bruin. And so Joe Bruin would be introducing himself. Let's say he's speaking to a legislator about some passionate topic that he has an interest in. So he'd introduce himself, mention he's from Los Angeles, mention where he works, right? Maybe he's at the UCLA Tarjan Center and also serves on the committee with Disability Rights California with their youth advisory board. He would mention what his, professional or advocacy interests are. And so maybe in this case, his interest is in accessible transportation. Maybe he's also interested in inclusive education and some other things. But you're going to mention sort of what your advocacy topic is at this point when you're introducing yourself and really building trust with the person that you're talking to. You also want to mention the work that you do. So Joe might mention, I'm a peer advocate and mentor for other young adults with disabilities. I speak on panels, I help train professionals, and I support youth in learning about their rights. So that's really establishing trust with the person across from Joe, right? He's kind of explaining who he is. But if you really want to sell your idea, it's not just enough to kind of show that you're trustworthy and that you know what you're talking about. It's also really nice to share your story, and that's the emotion part of this story. So what is, first of all, the issue you want to talk about? In this case, let's say the issue that Joe is interested in is transportation barriers for people with disabilities in Los Angeles. So then, in terms of sharing how this relates to Joe, he could explain how his disability status helps to inform his experience on this topic. Like, what is his lived experience, basically, on this topic? So maybe as someone with a physical disability who uses a wheelchair, Joe might mention how frustrating it can be when the bus ramp doesn't work on his public transportation, or when his paratransit is late or doesn't even show up at all. The fact that he's missed classes and job interviews and social events because of transportation issues. That's really adding the emotion and some context to telling the story. You also need to explain why it should matter to the person across from you. It's not just about Joe's story. It's like, how is this affecting other people? Well, transportation really connects us to everything, right? To our school, to work, to healthcare, to our community. And so if it's not accessible, it's kind of like locking the door to this access. It's also helpful when telling your story to kind of explain how that problem makes you feel. It's keeping it personal. And so, in thinking about these transportation issues, Joe feels maybe kind of isolated, feels like he can't fully participate in the community and loses out on chances to learn or to earn money or to make friends. This is the impact of this problem. And then what's the goal in sharing all of this? Well, the goal is that he wants to raise awareness about how inaccessible transportation harms disabled people and really encourage others to make changes to make the system more fair and more reliable for everyone. Okay, but we're not going to stop there. That's we've established some trust. We've talked about the emotional aspect. Now we need to get into the logic. What are we going to do about this? What are we asking for? And this is where you can start with giving out some facts about transportation barriers for people with disabilities in this example. So one fact is that only 3 out of 10 metro train stations in LA have working elevators that work 100% of the time. 3 out of 10. Paratransit rides have to often be booked a day in advance, which can make it really hard if there's an emergency or things come up kind of spontaneously. And many rideshare drivers will illegally refuse passengers with wheelchairs or service animals. These are important facts to share with that person who you're telling your story to. Next part is this is the ask. This is really key. We're going to end with the ask, right? So you want to think about, what do you want to change? Well, the ask is that we want more accessible, reliable, and flexible transportation options for disabled riders in Los Angeles. We're keeping it specific. What are we asking for? We're asking that LA Metro improve training for drivers, invest in equipment maintenance, and expand same-day ride options for paratransit users, right? And is there a call to action? Yes, we want them to support funding for accessible transportation and invite riders with disabilities to help design these improvements, right? They need to have a seat at the table. You kind of end telling the story with, offering to answer any questions, offering to be a resource, thanking them for their time and making sure they know how to contact you. So this is how we teach our emerging disability rights leaders how to tell their story. They have to think about what they're passionate about and start to learn how to tell that story. And that's part of our Advocacy Academy, just one of the many skills we teach. So now that you've seen a little snapshot of what we do, I wanted to share with you a little snapshot of some of our research outcomes. And so this was a paper that was published recently in a peer-reviewed journal on a pilot study that we did with the UCLA Advocacy Academy. This research was headed up by Dr. Blake Werner, who is a postdoctoral fellow at the Tarjan Center and also our chief clinical fellow at the UCLA Peers Clinic. I believe he's on this call right now. And so hello, Blake. Thank you for your important work. Want to highlight this study very briefly for you. So this was again, a pilot study, so a very small study, about 10 participants, mostly female, but a little gender diverse, and a little bit ethnically and racially diverse. You can see the statistics here on the screen. And these are the characteristics of our fellows, the participants who are going through the program. These are our emerging disability rights leaders. Remember that we also had other participants like our senior fellows. These were people who were already established disability rights leaders. They served as part of that coaching dyad, right? And then we also had our advocacy coaches. So there's lots of people involved, but these are the demographics for our participants in the program. This is just an overview of the curriculum. It used to be 10 weeks in length. After doing some needs assessment with our participants, we extended the program by 2 weeks, so it's now 12 weeks. But in this study, this pilot study, we started our first week with some introductions about advocacy and policy making. The second and third week, we screened the film Crip Camp. And so if you're not familiar with this documentary, it's a really well done, award-winning documentary that really chronicles the history of the disability rights movement, particularly in California. On the second screening day of that documentary, we actually were able to invite the director of that film, who also stars in it, to do a discussion with our participants. It's very impactful, very inspiring, definitely a highlight of the Advocacy Academy. We also cover topics related to the history of advocacy, things like testifying. We did an introduction to government and politics. We have our storytelling sort of workshop about telling your story, and some important content about advocacy in practice. And then again, all of this culminates or ends with an advocacy showcase where each of the participants would tell their story and give their advocacy pitch. So one of the things that we wanted to know as part of this pilot program is really, what was most helpful? Of all of the curricula that we presented, what was the most helpful? And Crip Camp, that part 2 of Crip Camp where they got to interview the director, that really kind of led the charge as maybe the most helpful in many ways. That and also advocacy in practice were very much appreciated by the participants. And also the sessions on introduction to government and politics, as well as kind of advocacy and testifying. Those were also quite popular. Also along with the history of advocacy. So, there was lots of popular topics, but those were kind of the ones that stood out among everything else. At the end of this pilot, about 90% of our participants completed the program, with 77% attending at least 8 of the 10 sessions. So really good, what we call like retention in the program. People stuck around and they participated pretty meaningfully. 100% of the participants reported increased advocacy knowledge, advocacy skills, and also satisfaction with the program. So all of them indicated that was helpful. And in particular, the participants reported significant improvements in their confidence, in their leadership identity, and also in their readiness to become advocates and mentors. They were ready to go, even wanted to mentor other people. Many of them were signing up to be senior fellows in the next round of the academy. So definitely establishing some really confident new leaders. We also asked our senior fellows, remember that these are our disability rights leaders. These are the established individuals already in our field. We had them also identify what was helpful to them in this advocacy academy, which we used to call the Leadership Academy. And they identified 3 major areas of improvement. Their leadership growth. They found significant improvements in their mentorship and their feelings of belonging. There's definitely a sense of community that happens in these academies. And also in their own professional development. There's a lot of networking that's happening in these meetings. It wasn't the goal of what we were doing, but that's absolutely happening. So that professional development and networking was definitely very powerful for them as well. So basically, kind of in sum, these findings were supporting the benefit of a disability-led leadership model that prepares individuals with lived experience for leadership and policy-making roles. So we were feeling very confident that this program was working. So remember, this is just one component of our workforce preparation and placement partnership with the California Department of Developmental Services. The other component that I'm going to highlight here relates to employment. And that is our Peers for Careers program. It's one thing to get people prepared to be advocates and disability rights leaders. It's another to help them get jobs. That's a whole different set of skills. And so I want to talk a little bit about why employment matters. Employment is a primary pathway to financial independence, to social inclusion, and also to improve mental health and quality of life. And that's true for all of us, not just for people with disabilities. A lack of employment, though, is associated with increased isolation, with reduced feelings of well-being, and also long-term dependency. So the takeaway really here is that employment isn't just an outcome, it impacts adult functioning and quality of life. Now, supported employment is one way to address employment disparities for people with disabilities. We know that people with disabilities have a much higher unemployment rate or underemployment rate. And supported employment includes individualized job support in real-world settings. And research shows that supported employment is going to increase the likelihood of obtaining employment. It's going to increase job retention, so the ability to keep a job. It's going to improve quality of life. It's also less expensive than some other traditional services, and it's associated with better employment outcomes at similar and less cost, at similar rates and at less cost. So it's just a really considered to be a very practical approach to addressing, again, some of the disparities for people with disabilities in employment settings. So the takeaway here is that people with intellectual and developmental disabilities can really benefit from supported employment. So this is going to be a direction that we're going to head with this program. So some of the research-supported components of supported employment include things like job coaching. Probably most people have heard about job coaching. Structured training programs, so that's teaching skills, kind of like Peers for Careers, right, where you're teaching skills related to finding and maintaining employment. Also workplace accommodations, right, creating a more neuro-inclusive, supportive work environment is important, and that's often done through workplace accommodations. And also employer education, so helping to support employers to be more neuro-inclusive in the workplace is also an important component of supported employment. So the takeaway here is that really the strongest programs are going to have multiple components, and those are going to outperform just these isolated supports. So job coaching is great, but in isolation, not as powerful as when you add it with these other components. And so as a reminder, that's what we're doing in this workforce preparation and placement program with DDS, right? We've got those 5 components. We've got the neuro-inclusive employer training, right, with DDS. We've got our advocacy academy. We have our Peers for Careers, which is those employment soft skills. We've got individualized coaching. That's the job coaching piece. And then we have paid internship opportunities at DDS and UCLA. So as I'm talking about the employment piece, I do want to give you a little background about peers, because the program that we use to teach employment related social skills is the PEERS program. It's an acronym. It stands for the Program for the Education and Enrichment of Relational Skills. And this is an international program that I developed at UCLA all the way back in 2004. And there's many different PEERS programs, but what you should know is that programs have been translated into dozens of languages. They're used in over 150 countries across the globe. And we have evidence-based programs for employment. That's Peers for Careers. We have Peers for Dating, as well as Peers for Young Adults, Peers for Adolescents, and Peers for Preschoolers. And those last three programs are all focused kind of on friendship skills, making and keeping friends, and handling conflict and rejection. So lots of different programs really across the lifespan. But something that really kind of unifies these programs that make them rather unique from other social skills programs is that PEERS is one of the only evidence-based social skills programs. And what that means is that there's, just decades of research that shows that these programs are effective in meeting whatever the social goals are of the participants. There's over 100 peer-reviewed papers at this point that establish the evidence base of PEERS. We also have a social coaching model to all of our programs. And so social coaches are trained to support participants out in the real world, outside of our treatment settings. So in the example of Peers for Careers, we have career coaches that provide support in the real world. We are also only teaching what are called ecologically valid social skills. So that's the technical term for we're teaching what we know works in reality. We're not just teaching what we think would work for finding and keeping a job, but we're actually teaching what research says is working in finding and keeping jobs. And then finally, another unique aspect of PEERS is that it's one of the only cross-culturally adapted and validated social skills programs in the world. It's used again all over the globe, and it's actually been tested pretty effectively in numerous research studies in different parts of the world. So when talking about teaching social skills, I think it's really important to think about the role of neurodiversity. Okay, so neurodiversity, as you probably know, means that people have different ways of thinking and interacting with the world. And we really need to respect the role of neurodiversity when learning new social strategies. The differences that people experience, they don't make them less than. They're just differences. And there are actually a lot of strengths in neurodiversity. And PEERS is very much a strengths-based approach. We're building skills upon pre-existing strengths. So it's very important to also talk about the importance of choice in this process. Each week in PEERS, we review strategies, in the case of PEERS for Careers, related to employment. And we review strategies that have been shown to be either socially helpful or socially risky. We show kind of both sides of that. But learning or even using the strategies that are taught in PEERS should never be about changing the person, right? That's never the goal. Really, learning and using the strategies or the skills should be about enhancing social interactions so other people can appreciate us for who we already are. And ultimately, learning and using these strategies that are taught in PEERS, that's really going to be a personal choice. Right? We're not forcing this on to anyone. In fact, everyone that comes into our program has to really establish they want to be there. They want to learn these skills. That is going to be a personal choice. And because that is such an important philosophy that we have in the PEERS program, we begin every session for all of our programs with this neuro-affirming pledge. And the pledge is that we value neurodiversity, acceptance, and authenticity. We honor the diverse ways that people experience the world, and we respect each person's unique perspectives and communication styles. Right? We recognize that there's no one right way of interacting with others or connecting with others. So if using the strategies that are taught in PEERS ever feels like masking or camouflaging, or if they don't align with that person's goals, they don't have to use the skills. They don't have to use the strategies. Learning and using the strategies taught in PEERS is definitely going to be a personal choice. And that is such an important philosophy that we actually repeat that each week in our programs. So in the Peers for Careers curriculum, remember we're focusing on the soft skills related to finding and maintaining employment. So this is a little overview of some of the skills that we teach. We start with choosing a career. Unlike other employment kind of related programs for people with autism or with other developmental disabilities, a lot of these programs, they sort of like put people in jobs and do kind of job placement and give them job experience. And there's a lot of benefit to getting different experiences. But in Peers for Careers, we want to start with, well, actually, what are you interested in? And rather than placing people in jobs, we want to start with, well, what kind of career do you want? What are your career interests? And in the case of this workplace program that we've developed with DDS, their careers are going to be interested in policy making, and advocacy, right? That's going to be a shared interest of everyone. But in other peers programs, they might have other career interests. So we start with identifying a career interest and even creating a career action plan, figuring out what is it going to take to get to where I want to be. And it often involves many different steps over many different years. It also often involves things like doing informational interviews with people who are already in the careers that we're interested in and learning about how they got to where they are. And so this is, again, where we start our program, is just in kind of career development and thinking about choosing a career. We also have to talk about things like creating resumes or curriculum vitae, how to find and apply for employment, how to interview, really important strategies related to interviewing skills. Also networking skills. A lot of people get their jobs through networking with other people in their industry. Conversational skills, important. We need to know how to communicate with people, whether we're interviewing or talking to coworkers in the workplace. Electronic communication is also an important component of communication that we cover. Related to advocacy, we also talk about things like disclosing diagnoses and differences, which will always be a personal choice, but we want to give them strategies for how to do that effectively, as well as requesting accommodations. Some people may require or need accommodations in the work setting, others may not, but we need to give them strategies and tools for how to request those accommodations if they're needed. So that's very advocacy kind of based. We also talk about different kind of communication strategies like starting, entering, and exiting conversations in the workplace with coworkers. We talk about organizational skills, stress management. We talk about navigating kind of the workplace culture. And we even talk about things like conflict resolution, how to resolve conflict in the workplace. So I wanted to give you a snapshot, just like I did with the Advocacy Academy. I'm giving you a snapshot of one of the skills that we teach in Peers for Careers, and this relates to disclosing differences or diagnoses. So how do you do that? How would you disclose a difference or a diagnosis to an employer or to someone in the workplace? And if our goal is to get and keep a job, what are some socially risky behaviors that we might want to avoid when disclosing a difference or a diagnosis to an employer? So we often do a lot of role play demonstrations in peers, and we don't just show the socially helpful behavior. We often start with the socially risky behavior, things you would maybe want to avoid. So in this role play, you're going to see two people on the screen. One person on the left is Dr. Blake Warner. I just referred to him a moment ago. He was the lead principal investigator on our Advocacy Academy pilot study. He's playing the role of the employer or the supervisor in this role play. And then you also see someone, her name is Dr. Alina Batesman. She's playing a character right now, but you're going to see her trying to disclose a diagnosis to her employer, but she's going to do it in a way that's kind of socially risky. And so we introduce this by saying, watch this role play and think about what Alina is doing that might be socially risky in disclosing a difference or a diagnosis.
Well, thanks for coming in today. How have things been going?
How's things been going? Well, I'm diagnosed with anxiety, so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm really anxious. My doctor diagnosed me, so.
Well, thanks for sharing with me.
Okay, so we would sort of time out that role play. We'd ask what Alina did that was a little risky in disclosing that diagnosis. And the risky part is that she just kind of blurted out that she's been diagnosed with anxiety, but she didn't really share what that meant for her or what her supervisor could do to support her. How is that impacting her work? So we do a little perspective taking, and we think about, well, what was that like for the supervisor? What did he think of Alina? And, would he be able to help her? Would he even know how to help her at this point? So that's sort of the risky way of disclosing a diagnosis or a difference. Instead of doing that, we want to share kind of what we call are the ecologically valid steps, which just means what works in reality, based on what research has told us. And so what we know about disclosing a difference or a diagnosis is that you want to begin with kind of choosing the right time, the right person, and the right context. So the right time would be, during a meeting, maybe with your supervisor. The right person would probably be someone who could help you, right? A supervisor in this case. And choosing the right context, there's a need to disclose this difference. Maybe she's sort of struggling in the workplace, in this case with her anxiety. So from there, you want to kind of acknowledge the difference. What's happening? What's going on? In this case, she's feeling pretty anxious in the workplace. And giving an explanation for this difference can also be helpful. This is where often labels are often brought into the conversation. That's very much a personal choice, but this would be where someone might mention, being diagnosed, in this case, with anxiety, or being autistic, having a physical disability, a learning disability, any number of things. But they sort of explain the differences. So again, very much a personal choice, what you choose to call this or how you choose to explain the differences, but it is helpful to give some context to that person that you're talking to. From there, it's not just enough to maybe give a label, for example, but you have to acknowledge what the difference means for you. So in the case of an autistic person, saying I'm autistic doesn't really give you a lot of context about what's going on with that person. There's actually even a saying in the field that if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism, right? There's so much variability and differences across people in their experience of being autistic. And so acknowledging what that difference means to you is going to be important to helping to explain these differences to the person that you're talking to. Now, the next couple steps are, in my opinion, the most important steps of all. And the next step is that you want to turn whatever could be seen as a challenge into a strength. Very important. A lot of times people just stop with the challenges and the differences, and they don't really ever talk about what makes them special and unique, and what is the strength that they're bringing with these differences. And there's a lot of strengths in neurodiversity, right? Tons of them. So turning a challenge into a strength. So for the example there with Alina, and she's talking about being anxious, the thing about people who are anxious is they're often really conscientious and sometimes even kind of perfectionistic. Like they just really want to get things right, That's a wonderful characteristic in an employee, right? You want people to get it right. You want them to care about their work. And that sort of relates to that next step, which is making that strength an asset to the company, to the people that you're working with. And so very important, again, turning those challenges into strengths and making yourself an asset to the company, the organization. We also have to be prepared to answer any questions that might come up, and also remember that employment is a choice. If you don't like the way that your supervisor or whoever you're sharing this with is receiving this information, your decision whether or not this is the right setting for you, and also thinking about your rights at the same time. So, of course, in following kind of the formula that we use for teaching these skills, we started with this socially risky role play. We did a little perspective taking on what could be kind of risky about just blurting out a diagnosis with no context or any kind of additional information. We presented these ecologically valid steps, which again is that technical term for the steps that really work in the real world for disclosing a difference or diagnosis. And now we're going to kind of wrap this up with showing a role play of a socially helpful example of disclosing a difference or diagnosis. So we would say, watch this role play and think about what Alina is doing that's socially helpful in disclosing a diagnosis to her supervisor.
Well, thanks for coming in today. How have things been going for you?
Pretty well. There's actually something I've been wanting to talk to you about. So you might have noticed that I tend to get a little anxious sometimes, particularly around deadlines.
Yeah, I did notice that.
Yeah, so I've actually been diagnosed with anxiety. And for me, that means that I tend to be very perfectionistic and I tend to get really worried around deadlines. But on the positive side, my anxiety means that I don't tend to miss deadlines ever. And I actually am really detail oriented, which I think would contribute pretty nicely to my role here.
Well, thank you so much for sharing that with me, Alina. I've really noticed your attention to detail, and I think you're right that it's a great fit for Central Library here.
Thank you.
All right, so we would time out. We'd ask which steps Alina followed for disclosing a difference or diagnosis. We'd do a little perspective taking. What was that like for Alina's supervisor? What did he think of Alina? Would he want to help her? And, another part of this process, too, is requesting accommodation. So that might be the next step in this conversation. But again, that will be a personal choice. But those two skills are actually taught together, disclosing differences in diagnoses and also requesting accommodations. Okay, so of course, by the way, after that, of course, the next thing, in order to learn these skills, you have to practice them. So we would do what are called behavioral rehearsal exercises, where then the young adult participant would be practicing disclosing a difference or diagnosis with their career coach, and then we would give them homework assignments to practice outside of our sessions as well. All right, so I wanted to share you a brief snapshot of some research around the Peers for Careers program. And this research that I'm going to be sharing with you was funded by Autism Speaks. We received an adult transition research grant awarded to my friend and colleague, Dr. Amanda Goldsrud at UCLA. She's an investigator in the Center for Autism Research and Treatment, close collaborator of mine, and we do a lot of research around college to career transition. So in this study, we investigated the efficacy or the benefit of Peers for Careers. In this program, it was a 20-week didactic course rather than a 16-week program. We provided a 10-week internship opportunity following that 20-week course on the skills that we teach for finding and maintaining employment, and then there was a 10-week follow-up period. And really in this study, we were targeting the development of employment social skills in the work setting. This is for autistic adults. We, again, are providing these internship or employment opportunities. But what was different in this study that we were really testing was the impact of career coaching. So all of the participants were randomized to different aspects of career coaching. So we had 106 autistic young adults that were interested in employment. They were randomized at the very beginning of the study to either receive a career coach or have no career coach. And remember, the career coaches in the case of Peers for Careers were undergraduate or graduate students who have some interest in autism or developmental disabilities, and we trained them to be career coaches. Now, in this design, this is a multi-staged randomized trial, and what that means is that there were 2 different times where we randomly assigned people to different groups. So the first time was at the beginning. They were randomized to either receive a coach or no coach. Then after that 20-week didactic kind of lesson, the curriculum, they were re-randomized in the no coaching group to either now receive a coach or to continue not to have a coach. So in the end, we had 3 groups. We had a constant coach group, so that means they had a career coach the whole 40 weeks of our program. We had the added coach group, which means that they received a coach halfway through the program. And then we had the never coached group. They just never had a career coach. And then we tested to see who was most likely to benefit from this program. Just very quickly, some participant demographic information. So the majority of the participants were male, somewhat ethnically diverse. All of the participants had some experience with post-secondary education, right? So that would be some sort of college setting. They were sometimes full-time in college, sometimes part-time, but they had some experience with post-secondary education. And they all had different kinds of employment status, but about 23% of them had some experience with paid employment. About 10% had done some sort of unpaid or volunteer, employment-related activities, and then about 66% were unemployed when they entered our study. This program really was developed for autistic adults who were sort of low support needs. So they were of average IQ, but all were diagnosed with autism in this study. All right, so just to kind of give the recap, this is a 20-week course. They attended classes provided over Zoom for 2.5 hours. By the way, initially these groups were supposed to be in person, but this study, the beginning of the study, coincided with the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic. Literally the week we were supposed to start groups, there was the shutdown. So we had to pivot pretty quickly. And by May of 2020, we actually were running groups online. So it just took us a couple months to get organized, and we moved everything to Zoom. We had separate homework review meetings with our young adults and with their career coaches. Remember, there's homework assignments associated with Peers for Careers. And so we want to review those, and to individualize things for each person, we would meet separately with their coach and then with the young adult. But we had combined lessons with everybody, all the coaches, all of the young adults. We had in-session practice exercises, and the homework assignments were completed again outside of the session. For those who had coaches, they completed those assignments with the help of their coaches. There were basically 4 testing time points. There was the time 1 or T1, which is at the beginning of the program. T2 or time 2 is right after the 20-week course is over. Time 3 or T3 is after the 10-week internship or employment phase. And then time 4 is after a 10-week kind of follow-up period. So I wanted to share with you some of the outcomes of this study. So this is looking at the different groups. So the dotted red line on the screen are those who never received a coach. The dotted green line is those who had a coach added halfway through. The straight blue line is those who had a constant coach. They had coaches the whole time. And then the black line is just everybody, all combined together. And what you see is a nice increase in paid employment across all of the groups, right? From time 1 to time 4. Then we went from a 24% employment at the beginning of the study to 46% employment just 40 weeks later. And the largest gains really happened during the time that we were doing the Peers for Careers curriculum, time 1 to time 2. But there were no differences across the coaching groups. So everybody was kind of equally benefiting. When we look at employment-related activities, so that could be having unpaid internships or volunteer positions, which can also be very important to career development. That also significantly increased over time. It actually doubled from 33% at time 1 up to 66% at time 4. And the biggest gains really happened from time 1 to time 2 during that first 20 weeks of the course, but they continued and maintained all the way to the end. But again, no differences between the coaching groups, which I know surprises people, but one thing I should mention is that even the people that were in the no coaching group, they still got quite a bit of coaching from our treatment team, because they were still practicing skills and getting coaching during the sessions, but not outside of them. We also looked at social responsiveness, which relates to autism symptoms, sort of self-perceived autism symptoms across the course of the study. We used a measure called the social responsiveness scale, and you want scores to go down on this scale because, again, it's an autism screening tool. And we saw significant improvements there from time 1 to time 2 that were maintained over time. And what's really exciting about that is that the scores actually shifted from the mildly elevated autism symptoms range to a more typical range, which is really exciting and also very clinically meaningful. But again, no differences across the groups, whether they had a coach or not. So everybody was kind of equally benefiting. We also saw improvements in social skills knowledge. They were learning the skills that we were teaching in the Peers for Careers curriculum at equal rates across the groups. And then we also, here's where we started to see some differences across the groups. We looked at preparedness or perceived preparedness for employment. Did they feel ready? And we did see a significant interaction for perceived preparedness for employment. The constant coach group showed the greatest gains in feeling really prepared for employment compared to the no coach group or the added coach group. So just their own perceptions about how ready they were to have a job, those were significantly different. Those who had constant coaches actually felt more prepared. And then also very important, we looked at the impact of career coaching among the unemployed people at baseline. Now, this is telling us who's most likely to benefit from having a career coach. And among those individuals that had not been engaged in employment-related activities at the start of our study, at the start of the program, coaching had a very significant impact on their employment-related activities. And in fact, what we found was 73% of participants who were assigned to the constant coach condition, who had come in with no employment activities, they were engaged in employment-related activities at a much higher rate. So 73% of them actually ended up having some type of engagement with employment-related activities. But again, this is among those who had no employment-related activities at the start. So what this really tells us is if someone's coming into our program and they're not actively engaged in any type of employment-related skills, they're probably going to need a coach. They're going to benefit more from having a coach. Okay, so that's a little bit about some of the research behind our programs, a little snapshot of some of the skills that we teach. Want to remind you all, we're very excited to be launching this program. We literally are within the first month of this collaboration with the California Department of Developmental Services, and we're already looking to start enrolling people in this program. And so this fall, we are going to be starting our Peers for Careers and Advocacy Academy. If you're interested, I'm going to have some contact information in my last slide here where you can get in touch. But we're very excited to share more about this moving forward, but excited to also launch the idea here in our Tarjan Center community lecture. For those of you that are also interested in other industries, we have another program called Neuropipes. This is a Peers for Careers research study where we combine the soft skills of finding and maintaining employment through Peers for Careers and also the hard skills of biomanufacturing. And so we partnered with our colleagues at the Texas A&M National Center for Therapeutics Manufacturing, who provide a 2-week intensive boot camp on biomanufacturing. It involves a certificate at the end. So we're kind of combining hard skills and soft skills for biomanufacturing. And then we're also working with our industry partners at Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson to create more neuro-inclusive workspaces for neurodivergent talent. So really, really exciting research. We just got our second round of funding. We completed our first study with Neuropipes, very successful, and they wanted to fund us again to continue this project. So we're very excited. We also have a number of other peers, clinical services and educational groups that are run and offered throughout the year. We have our programs for preschoolers, adolescents, young adults. We provide these programs in person and online, and we even have educational groups available for people worldwide. So very, very active clinic. If you want more information, there's the QR code for this. These different clinical services. We often also provide a lot of certified teleconferences for mental health professionals and educators, for providers essentially that want to provide the peers curricula in their own practice. And so those are offered 7 times a year over Zoom. And if you want more information, again, you can use this QR code to access these trainings for professionals. Finally, we also have some published evidence-based manuals that are available publicly to anyone who's interested. You can just check them out on Amazon or wherever books are sold. But again, these are some of the only evidence-based social skills curricula that are publicly available. Finally, I'll just kind of wrap up with our contact information. If you want more information about our partnership with DDS and our Advocacy Academy or Peers for Careers, this is how to reach us. But with that, I will turn things over to Dr. Jasper Estebillo, who's going to introduce our community discussant. And meanwhile, thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Laugeson, for this wonderful talk, highlighting an important partnership and how collaboration can be leveraged to build pathways to employment for autistic adults. We will now have our community discussant, followed by Q&A, and we will end at 1:30 p.m. Pacific time. Reminder that all lectures are recorded and are available on the Tarjan Center website. Now I would like to introduce our community discussant. Monika Jezebelle is a candid advocate, public speaker, community researcher, creative artist, diverse performer, and avid world traveler. Monika is a late diagnosed ADHD or autistic and ADHD queer individual who is committed to advocating for their autistic peers and communities of people with disabilities. They focus on the experiences of autistic gender nonconforming and trans communities, as well as highlighting the need for attainable evaluations for neurodivergent conditions in adults. Monika will be sharing their lived experience and thoughts on today's presentation. All right, I will hand things over to Monika.
Thanks, Dr. Estebillo. Hi, everyone. I'm Monika Jezebelle from LA, California. My topic today is breaking free, the impact of autism diagnosis for adult assigned female at birth individuals, or AFAB. I strive to remove traditional ideas of gender terms, so I may use AFAB and AMAB, assigned male at birth, within my speech. So my pronouns, let's see, next slide. My pronouns are she and they. I hold a BFA from Cal State Fullerton, majoring in three-dimensional art, and a minor in German. Pictured here are some silver rings I made for my Transformation Art series. I was an NCAA Division I epee fencer at CSUF, and I went to school on scholarship. Next slide. I'm an ADHD Autistic Queer Latinx Senior Fellow at the UCLA Advocacy Academy, where I've taken part the last 2 years. I'm a LUN trainee and a member of various UCLA Tarjan Center committees. I'm a peer co-researcher with the Double Rainbow Lab at UMass Boston. We focus on research to benefit the autistic gender nonconforming communities. I'm also in the Lived Experience Advisory Group for DDS, representing my local regional center. I advocate in the ARC with their Research and Training Center. And lastly, PFLAG LA offers online services for queer individuals and their families and supporters, and I'm the support group facilitating lead for our gender expansive meetings. Next slide. According to the CDC, AFAB individuals are 4 times less likely to be diagnosed with autism than AMABs. I was hyperlexic, teaching myself to read at 3. I was placed in the GATE program for gifted and talented education and took computer programming classes at 5. I received A's for most of my education, with the exception of having difficulties with math. Next slide. At home, I was reprimanded often for my tone and slamming doors, which I was completely unaware about both. I had a precise sense of smell and hated uncomfortable clothes, such like turtlenecks. I was unable to read an analog clock. And sometimes an onslaught of unexpected events would occur at once, and I'd sob on the floor, melting down. Bonding to animals over people, I enjoyed being alone, reading nonfiction with my pet duck on my lap. On the outside, though, I was an overachiever, a competitive baton twirler who was coached by the head majorette of the LA Rams. I became a professional Spanish dancer, touring with a dance group. I took classes 5 days a week, up to 3 times a day, being excused from schools for these performances. I did not fit the narrow presentation of autism that professionals were looking for in the 80s and 90s. Next slide. Transitioning into middle school, social hierarchy reared its head, and I was bullied relentlessly by AFABs in my class who saw me as a nerdy outcast and a complete pariah. I developed an avoidant restrictive eating disorder. By 8th grade, I spiraled into PTSD, depression, and anxiety. From my 20s on, relationships were experiences of being an easy mark for manipulation. I was unaware of my codependency, and I went for people who were avoidant. I struggled heavily with driving, where merging onto freeways and navigating a 4-way stop was a nightmare. Employment was hard to secure, unfulfilling, and draining. I didn't know how to do it. I knew I wanted to have a good job, but how to get there was lost on me. So here I excelled at the academic world, but everyday life as an adult was turmoil. I felt like a failure at being human and would sink into shutdown silence in my bed for weeks at a time, blotting out the world around me. Next slide. A 2017 study in the Journal of Autism and Mental Disorders states the main reason that autistic adults delay seeking a diagnosis is they fear their provider will not believe them. Before receiving care myself at UCLA Lend, previous doctors told me I could not be autistic because I graduated college and I made eye contact. The expense, stigma, and inability to explain symptoms are also significant barriers to autistic adults. Diagnosis brought a rush of relief, discovering a legitimate reason to explain who I am. It allowed my decades of shame, self-criticism, and regret to slowly evaporate with time. I realize I am one of the privileged few of my generation to receive a diagnosis in my 40s. Next slide. Many of us are not diagnosed until we reach adulthood, as per the CDC. A predictive model estimates that at least 39% more AFAB adults should be diagnosed with autism. If we are not seen in the diagnostic tools, then we will be overlooked due to the bias of healthcare professionals. Some of us, unfortunately, have been misdiagnosed with other disorders, such as borderline personality disorder, where traits can seem comparable on the surface, but are driven by very differing underlying factors. Next slide. Because I and other AFAB individuals were missed in our youth, we are denied state services for our very existence. Autism is lifelong. We deserve the option to choose to participate in the programs our younger selves would have benefited from, which can make a positive difference for us today. Outside assistance, like skilled medical providers, vocational and general rehabilitation, and peer advocates can help us navigate society with more tools and confidence. I have found openly autistic-led adult support groups who do not shame unmasking and celebrate disclosure empower me. Personally, I feel if I should hide being autistic, then what lesson does that teach those around me, especially the youth? Once a person has a guidepost of one autistic adult they know, then it's not so foreign. It breaks down stigma and humanizes what autism really is. Next slide. Through the guidance of the UCLA Leadership Program and the inspiring array of their medical professionals and their speakers, I choose to be an advocate and activist. I am a voice in emerging autistic culture. I appreciate your time listening to my advocacy story today, which reflects my struggle and the struggle of countless others. I'm available to continue this discussion or answer any questions you may have of my experience. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Monika, for telling your story and giving us an example of how we teach that skill in our Advocacy Academy, and as well as providing your insightful reflections. Now we will transition to Q&A with Dr. Laugeson and with Monika. As our audience continues to enter their questions into the Q&A, I would first like to start us off. Starting with Dr. Laugeson, you mentioned how this partnership came about between the Tarjan Center and the Department of Developmental Services, but how did the idea for the Advocacy Academy arise even before this partnership?
Oh, I love that question. Thank you so much, Jasper, for asking. I don't even think the person who inspired the idea knows this, although I know she's on this call right now watching this lecture, so I hope that she doesn't mind that I share this. But, you know, I was the former training director at the UCLA Tarjan Center before I became the director. And our former executive director, Olivia Rayner, was very sweet, very nurturing and mentoring, and wanted to send me to this leadership academy that was taking place at the University of Delaware kind of early in my tenure. And at first, truthfully, I was like, oh my God, it's a week. Like, I don't have a week. Like, I was just kind of panicked, like how I'm going to get all my work done and go to this leadership academy. But it ended up being this really life transforming experience. I learned so much about myself and my leadership style. And, you know, things like I was being very transactional and I wanted to be more transformative and all these terms that may or may not be familiar, but I learned a lot about myself. And I wanted others in our center to benefit from that. And in particular, she's our senior disability rights advocate, Keisha Weller. That was not her title at the time, but it is now. Was someone who was very inspiring to me. And I wanted Keisha to go to the Leadership Academy. She probably doesn't even know this. And it really bothered me that I didn't have anywhere to send her or to encourage, Dr. Rayner to send her. And I just, for years, I thought, we need to develop this. We need to develop a Leadership Academy for individuals with lived experiences. And it took years to develop, but eventually we did that with the help of a lot of individuals with lived experience. And I will be curious to talk to Keisha about this story because I don't think she's heard it before. But that is the backstory. I was just really wanting to support somebody who I saw as an emerging leader. And she really is. She had helped to co-lead the what was then called the Leadership Academy, now called the Advocacy Academy. Keisha Weller was very informative in helping us to develop the curriculum and also to lead the lessons. So thank you for letting me highlight her important contributions and inspiration.
Thank you, Dr. Laugeson, and thank you to Keisha for inspiring this Advocacy Academy. I guess it just highlights that necessity breeds innovation, truly.
That's right.
Monika, I would love to hear from you. So you shared your background and passion for advocacy. What Advocacy Academy skills did you learn during this training that have been the most impactful for you?
That's a great question. Yeah, I think for me, what was really helpful was all of the steps of learning to tell your story, of having facts along with emotions to connect with your readers or listeners so they can understand where you're coming from. I think that really helped me find a better framework on how to affect people.
Absolutely. Right. So really broken down in a concrete way, in addition to that coaching and feedback. It's very similar to, or modeled on the peers method, right? Where we have those cognitive rehearsals, the behavioral rehearsals, and all of the skills broken down in a very concrete kind of way. Seeing lots of questions coming into the chat, which is fun to see. I'm also seeing here, Dr. Laugeson, some questions about the Advocacy Academy eligibility, including age range. Do people have to be regional center or DDS clients? And can family members participate? Can you speak to some of the eligibility criteria for the Advocacy Academy?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and speaking of the Advocacy Academy, I want to thank Monika Jezebelle so much for sharing her experiences. And she has been such a leader in the program since then. I want to really highlight the fact that Monika not only went through that Leadership Academy, again, now called the Advocacy Academy, but she actually participated as a senior fellow and helped to mentor others and has been a wonderful advocate to so many people in our program. And so, and will be very inspiring, I'm sure, to many here today. So thank you so much for your important contributions. Yeah, there's not a lot to say about the inclusion criteria other than one of the biggest inclusion criteria is that the person or the participant does need to be a client of the California Regional Center system. And remember, if you think about the goal of this program, we're not only trying to promote and support emerging disability rights leaders with lived experiences, but ultimately we want to get these individuals jobs in the system, right? And the goal is ultimately in this project to get people jobs within the Department of Developmental Services. And so if you think about that, they're all going to get internships either at DDS or UCLA, but ultimately the final goal is to really get them to have jobs in the system that serves them. And so that is going to be probably one of the biggest restrictions. We want to make sure that people are clients of the California Regional Center system. But in terms of the age range, it's pretty flexible right now. We don't have a parent component as part of this program. However, every week in both the Advocacy Academy and in Peers for Careers, we have really extensive handouts that describe all of the skills that we're teaching, and we will share those with whomever would benefit from getting those. And so while we can't have parents zooming in, unfortunately, at this point in time for this particular program, I have a feeling many parents and family members will be behind the scenes also offering support. And so however we can best, provide that support to our family systems, we will do that. But in this program, we're going to have, because not everybody has family members that can participate, we wouldn't want that to exclude people. So we will have these coaching dyads that are made up of advocacy and career coaches and also already established disability rights leaders. So thank you for the question.
Absolutely. Right. Monika, tell us a little bit about your experience, as a senior fellow and coaching other emerging disability rights leaders.
Yeah, I found it really fulfilling to be able to coach the two people that I did. It was such a fulfilling idea to be able to be there and to support and to offer feedback and to just give an extra push of somebody that believes in you. I think if I would have had that growing up, it would have helped definitely propel me further as how I could see myself. And I've stayed in contact with both of the individuals I mentored and keep up with them so they know that they have someone that's out there in their corner out in the, disability rights field. So I've really enjoyed that experience and being able to connect in that way.
Thank you, Monika. I didn't know that, and that makes me really happy to hear that not only are we training individuals with lived experience and giving them these leadership skills, but we are truly creating this leadership pipeline, right? And implementing this next step with hopefully some internships and ultimately employment in all of these different spaces. So I love to hear that. I know that there were some questions about other resources and things that family members and community members can do. Dr. Laugeson or Monika, if you have suggestions, are there other resources that community members or family members can look into to learn about disability policy, whether it's through DDS or other parent organizations that we work with?
Yeah. I can start. There's a really wonderful resource that's available online, and I believe it's called Partners in Policy Making. Jasper, did I get it right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yes.
fantastic. I mean, really, really in depth, different modules on different aspects of policy making, and I think we could probably put the link in the chat. That's probably the premier that I would recommend. There's other, leadership programs and advocacy programs out there, but that's one that really stands out to me.
Right, Partners in Policy Making. I think off the top of my head, I know DDS certainly has some resources on their website, as well as the Association of University Centers on Disabilities, or AUCD. Their policy newsletter goes out regularly and is a great way to get some regular updates on things that are going on with policy and getting a lay language blurb. I'm seeing that our wonderful Diana has put a link into the chat to Partners in Policymaking. But Monika, do you have other resources, things that you would like to share with our audience in terms of learning about disability policy?
Yeah, I'd say for me, I found so much information as well as like minds in self-advocacy groups. Different areas have self-advocacy groups and nonprofits that will have information about ways to take part and things that are coming on the horizon. So that's really helped me with just having more outlets of things to learn from.
And Jasper, if I may, one other suggestion, you triggered the idea, is you mentioned AUCD, that's the Association for University Centers on Disabilities. They have this wonderful, I don't know if it's considered a podcast or not, but they have this wonderful series called Tuesdays with Liz. And it's hosted by Liz Weintraub, who's really one of the nation's leading disability rights leaders and a person with lived experience. And she talks about policy in Tuesdays with Liz. And so it's a really good, very accessible way to get information about policy initiatives and really very, very informative. So I would recommend that as well.
Great. Thank you for these wonderful resources. I know we only have a couple more minutes, but Dr. Laugeson and Monika, I have a special place in my heart for the Advocacy Academy, but I would love to hear from both of you. either what lesson or any standout memories from previous cohorts of the Advocacy Academy. If you have any anecdotes that you would like to share.
I'll start because I bet Monika has the best story of all because she actually experienced it. But I'll start with when we were developing the curriculum, we would have these regular meetings, and Dr. Jasper Estebillo is one of the co-facilitators of our Advocacy Academy. So that should probably not go without saying. She was one of the authors of our pilot study. But I don't know, Jasper, if you recall having these amazing meetings where we were developing the curriculum. And one of my favorite moments was when we developed the Tell Your Story. And it came from Dr. Blake Warner, who has a history of like debate and all these things, knew a lot about like the philosophy behind things. And he was speaking in Latin and I was super confused, but he was sort of explaining like the elements that you need when you're trying to convey a point, make a point and make a pitch for something. And I realized with the group that really what we were getting down to was the trustworthiness, right? The emotion, and then the logic. And so, and how perfect of an acronym, right? It's to tell your story. So that just stands out to me as like a moment that I'll probably remember throughout my career. But Monika, what about you? What stood out to you?
Oh gosh, there's so many moments that stood out, but one that carries with me, especially when I do events like this, is I remember one of the leadership academies having an individual who didn't want to share, wasn't confident on camera yet, and to see that individual bloom from the beginning to the end, and to have kind of the beauty of self-confidence and also to understand that their story mattered and their lived experience mattered. And it was a really transformative thing to see, and to see what the Leadership Academy, or now Advocacy Academy, can do for people, that it can really transform how you see yourself and how you experience the world around you.
Monika, can I also say another really special moment is happening right now in watching you share your own story and, in your emergence as a disability rights leader. That's like a beautiful example of, what can happen from this type of program. So I think this is a moment that I will probably carry with me also throughout my career. So I'm just so incredibly impressed by you and inspired by you. Thank you so much for telling your story today.
Thank you so much for this opportunity and for being part of this.
Thank you both. I know that we're at time, so I know that there's lots of questions. So to our audience, please feel free to send us an email if there are any follow-up questions for either Dr. Laugeson or for Monika. Thank you both for such an important and thought-provoking discussion. And thank you to the audience for attending our very first presentation of the UCLA Tarjan Center Community Lecture Series in partnership with DDS. Please remember to complete our evaluation survey, which has been shared in the chat and will be sent via email later this week. The recording for today's lecture, as well as all of our other lectures, will be available on our website. And with that, we will let everybody go, and we look forward to seeing you next month for the August 2026 Community Lecture Series. Bye, everyone, and thank you.